Today we are joined by David Morgan, founder of the Morgan Report, author of the book The Silver Manifesto and Second Chance, and has devoted more than 30 years to educating investors on opportunities to protect and grow their wealth. He is a huge advocate for precious metals, especially silver. So we'll be discussing financial solutions and I guess the alternative economic system and how you can protect your wealth from the collapsing system. How are you, David? And thanks for coming on.
George, thanks for asking. I'm doing well. Thanks.
Excellent. I've seen many of your interviews, I guess in the last couple of years as well. I guess the first question I have is, how did you get into the space initially? And I guess what's your story behind you getting into precious metals, getting into the alternative sort of economic space?
Well, for whatever reason, I was pretty fascinated by money and investing, even as a kid. And as a child, we lived out in the country. I used to water my dad's orchard, which was 1 acre of land. I don't want people to think it was like thousands of acres farm or something. But I'd hand water it when you're 10, 11 years old, 20 minutes at each tree, and there's 20 trees, takes a while. It's a little boring, but regardless, I would pay 25 cents a week to do that. And I just stacked all these 25-cent quarters. And then one day my dad paid me, and it was a Cupro nickel quarter. And of course, I noticed a change because everything else I had was 90% silver. So it kind of struck a chord with me, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. And I didn't say, well, a few years from now, I'll be the silver guru or any of that stuff. It just struck me odd that I intuitively knew it couldn't be the same value. And I also wondered why. Why would, it be minted this way? But I didn't really get any answers. Adults seem to just ignore it. Yeah. But I really got fascinated by money. So I started looking into it on my own, reading about it. By the time I had gotten in my late teens, I'd pretty much done enough study to realize that the banking system is a fractional reserve banking system. I learned that all fiat currencies failed. I learned, and then I started reading, newsletter authors and more books and all that stuff. So became pretty well self-studied on it. And one thing led to another. I had a aircraft career early on when I graduated from college and stayed there, but I've always been interested in finance and metals. Went back to school, got a finance degree, and started the Morgan Report pretty much at the beginning of the internet. Not the exact beginning. In fact, I've always been kind of an early adopter, not on everything, but on several things. And one, of course, was, connecting to the net. In the old days, early on, there weren't any browsers. There weren't any chat rooms. There was just, I think they called them bulletin boards. And you fired up a computer with the C prompt. And once you saw the C prompt, then you had to type in, what you wanted to do to the computer. That didn't last too long. The browsers came up. Netscape came up. I built my own web page with Netscape and did it for research purposes. And one day a guy called and said, "What is this? What do you do?" I said, "I write a newsletter," which I really hadn't, but that was my dream. And he said, "How much is it?" I go, "Well, I've been in business for 12 seconds. What do I tell this guy?" I came up with a number. He said, "Fine." So I'm on my way. I've started the business. And I was levitating for about, 5-10 seconds, George. Here's my dream. I'm going to live it. And then, of course, you did the one-handed clap where you take your palm and you whack yourself in the middle of the forehead and you go, "Wait a second, what did I just do?" I told one guy I'd write everything I know about the financial markets, particularly precious metals, emphasizing silver, for 1 year for this amount of money. That doesn't sound like early retirement. But I pressed on and it built from there. And of course, it's been established now for over 2 decades and I have a very large following. So basically, it's following your passion. It's really that simple. It sounds easy. It wasn't. But I just persevered through the whole thing.
Yeah, and I second the sort of working on your passion, and it's something that is kind of cliche, but it is truly the way to not only build wealth, but to know you're making a difference. Otherwise, I don't think it's really worth it. Otherwise, I think that is the way to go. And I know it is cliche, but you end up doing the work. It's not like you're working for someone else and you have to do a certain hours. You actually work harder, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning. I mean, the amount of articles I wrote for the public domain. I mean, I started at what we call Web 1.0, and everything was just basically an electronic letter that you would publish. And on the Web 1.0 website, I would literally get up very early in the morning, read all the news, financial news, and then I would pick and choose the best articles to post on my website. And I did that myself by hand for years. And a lot of times the way the website was set up by my webmaster, the whole article's title wouldn't fit within the spaces allotted. And I didn't want to have him rewrite the whole code. So I have to be very, very imaginative to come up with, the essence of the article and reword it and stick it up there. But no, a lot of juice in the beginning. I still have some, meaning, I've got enthusiasm for what I do still. But back in the beginning, I couldn't put in those kind of hours again now, not at my age, and probably not quite as driven. I've been somewhat, let's say, discouraged with seeing how long this fiat fiesta can continue, but I don't think it's got much longer to go.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue into what I'm going to ask next. And I think it just looks like it's on its last legs. There's not many more tools that the Fed and other central banks can even use now to keep it going. So I guess the next question would be, the next discussion is, how can you explain I guess there's some people out there who may not understand how fiat currencies such as the US dollar is not really our money. I guess just explain that. We have to sort of delve into the problem before we look at the solutions. So just talk about that briefly on basically how fiat currencies are not really our money, even though we have so much trust in the banks.
Yeah, well, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation, and it's owned primarily by Europeans. And it's outside of the government. In fact, it's the only agency that can tell the government to do anything it wants to, and the government can't do anything about it because they're not really connected. Now, that's the truth, but it's also quasi-government connected because everything revolves around the U.S. dollar. But the U.S. dollar is printed by the Treasury. And whatever the cost of printing is, we'll call it, I'll make up a number, 5 cents per bill. That is sold to the Federal Reserve at that cost, 5 cents. And then the Federal Reserve actually loans it to the federal government. So the federal government technically prints the money, but I think it's a better understanding that Federal Reserve issues it. It's borrowed into existence by the United States government. So the United States government has this huge debt, this what we call deficit, that they can never pay back. And that's how all these fiat systems basically end, is the debt gets so onerous, so unbelievably large that it's mathematically impossible to pay it back. And we've been in that condition for a very long time. But at some point, the system breaks. And once it's broken, it cannot be fixed. Usually there's a substitution. In other words, in most cases, you actually go back to a gold standard, which fixes the problem, at least temporarily, until that gets corrupted. But so it's a private corporation. And so you don't really own the money in a bank. I did a whole a very well watched video called something about bail-ins. You might type in bail-ins, David Morgan and Daniela Cambone. I think it's got like 1.6 million views. And in that discussion, I talk about the fact that anyone that's in the United States banking system, you're an unsecured creditor to the bank. The bank owns the money, not you. And that's something that's very important if we get a Cyprus type of situation in the United States, which is on the law books. It could happen. Will it happen? We don't know, but it could happen. So this begs people, once they understand that's a truth, a fact, a reality, that they need, in my opinion, to hedge against that problem, which means you've got to have something outside the system. And that, of course, could be crypto. It could be gold and silver, which are my choices. It could be something that's very barterable. I mean, it could be alcohol, cigarettes, coffee. It could be a lot of things. But the easiest, most recognized, most fungible is the precious metals.
Yeah. And I think once you realize that bail-ins and, potential social credit system like China could happen, or just you can't withdraw from the bank, makes you realize that you really do need to have not only a plan B, but you should really mostly own things outside of the system. It feeds into the system, which you don't want to do anyway, because you are feeding the beast in a way. And B, yes, you want to have your financial sovereignty. And like you said, bail-ins have happened before in a test case, in my opinion, in Cyprus, where they sort of took money basically out of people's accounts over a certain value, yes, which I suspect will probably happen again. But still, that power does lie, as you're not really owning that currency. They can easily do this. So even having that risk is really a reason to not have all of your eggs in that basket, for sure. And in my case, I mean, having pretty much most of your eggs out of that basket, to be honest. I mean, in that case, what's your, I guess, outlook on what's to come based on what's happened in the last 2 years? Do you see like a social credit system come into place where, based on medical status, for example? And I guess your overall outlook on what's to come in the next few years.
Well, number one is the banking elites don't want to lose control. I mean, the way the whole system is controlled is through the monetary system. I've said this many times, but it probably bears repeating that, we get these ideologies, we get the red-blue dynamic, and this is kind of a divide and conquer meme. You get, communism, socialism, fascism, democracy, constitutional republic, monarchy. It doesn't matter. All those things, well, sure it matters. It matters to me. I want to be in this system, It's all controlled by the money system. All of it. And so really that's where you got to go. If you want to look at the top of the pyramid, you got to look at who the money masters are. And if you look at who the money masters are, they don't care. As purportedly Rothschild said years ago, give me the power to, make the money, and I care not who makes the laws. It doesn't matter if it's a communist or a dictatorship or fascist or whatever. As long as I'm in charge of the money, that's what matters. So let's get that clearly established. And then from there, where do we go? Well, we always said, you can do it on a personal level, but where do they want to take us? Well, first they want to keep power, and they know they can't pay the debt. So they're scheming on a reset. And we hear this word all the time. The reset will be a resolution of the debt problem. And how they're going to resolve it exactly, I don't know. But I have a strong feeling / study and intuition that they will absolve their own debt, their own obligations, because they know governments can't pay them back, but they already own everything. So if you've used the fiat money system to own all of the wealth, and I'm not talking about paper money, they don't care about that. They know how the game's played. They created it. But if you've used that to own all of your industrial capacity, all of your transportation facilities, all the airlines, all the shipping ports, all of the major businesses, and you own that, you really don't care if the stock price of XYZ conglomerate is $10 or $200. You own it. You own that corporation. So that's when a deflationary scenario, they really don't care because it's the wealth is owned. What changes is the number of what it's pieces of paper it's worth. But since they create infinite paper for themselves, and it really doesn't matter from their perspective, I hope people are following that. So they'll also spill over into, we're doing it for your own good. And what that means is they will probably absolve some of the debt that the citizenry has, meaning, take your pick, mortgage, student loan, credit card, whatever. And I'm not saying they're going to take it all away. I don't know, but I think there'll be some kind of a gimme, that when you come into the new system, you'll automatically get X amount of central bank digital currency, and your loans will be forgiven, or they'll be moved out and reconfigured. You'll have a year's reprieve, or who knows. I don't think they know at this point, but they'll try to sweeten the deal to make it look like they're really helping you out. All you have to do is, sign up for the new one, and everything's going to be much better than it was. The old one didn't work, and it didn't work because of, and of course, the because of will be anything but their own selves that created the thing from the beginning. They'll never blame the banking system as a structure now, because that is the problem. So they will blame it on the war, or on a certain government, or a illness, or a combination thereof. Or us, we're doing all these bad things. We got to get in line. We've got to eat a certain way. We can only go so far. We're not allowed. And then lastly, because I don't want to forget it, it will be a social credit score, which is already, as you well know, and most of your listeners are probably aware, in China, but it's going to be worldwide. It's going to be based on how much you salute and say, yes, sir, 3 bags full. In other words, the way you adhere to the meme of the day by the control freaks, as long as you align yourself with them publicly, and what you do on social media, you will be patted on the head, and you'll be allowed to do almost anything within their realm of what little liberty they give you. And if you resist at all, especially in a social media type of environment, or you're out as an advocate or an activist, and you get on top of a log and you start spouting the truth to people, you will be degraded, or maybe even taken out of the system entirely.
I think that is the reality. And I think we have to realize that the system is going to be very much totalitarian and controlled. The CBDCs that will be introduced will be fully traceable, fully just transparent, fully, which, not only is a problem for us in the sort of privacy level, but also this could be an issue with taxes, in the sense that you can be taxed with any transaction, probably in an instant. Forget about doing tax returns.
I'll interrupt you there, and I'm not sure of this, but I'm pretty certain the whole income tax is going to just go away. I mean, you'll be taxed at point of sale, so everything that you buy will be taxed right when you do it. And of course, there'll be a scale on different items. For an example, if you're in the luxury car market, you'll probably pay a higher tax than if you're in the, basic car market. And they could apply that across the board. One thing about that, even though I don't like what they're doing, is that's a little more of a free method, meaning that you have a choice. I mean, if you've got the money to buy a luxury car, but you don't want to pay that much tax, you could go to a mid-size or whatever and pay less tax. That's just, I'm making all this up as an idea, but the system is so cumbersome, it's so convoluted, and there's so many problems. It'll be simple. Once the AI takes over, and you're right about it being, pretty much communist, but or totalitarian, but it's really a technocracy. It's really bringing in the artificial intelligence to monitor all these transactions, and then, as you said, tax them at point of sale. So I think that part's going to go away. Whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, you can make up your own mind. But it will be less of a, let's say, hassle for the citizens. They'll just go about their business. But it'll also be not only social credit score, it'll also be on your carbon footprint. So if you are driving too much, you might not be able to buy as much food. Or if you eat too much meat, you might not be able to drive as much. Or you get the idea. I mean, this is going to be such a control freak, pin down to the average person. It's going to be a nightmare for any of us that are in a free market thinking type camp.
Yeah, it will. But I would always advocate I believe it's still a choice to be involved in this system. And anyone out there who's still feeling like, this is inevitable, potentially it is, but it doesn't have to affect you as much as it does for someone who's, fully invested in the system and doesn't even know what's going on. So I guess that is the right segue to, I guess, how will owning precious metals particularly, and obviously especially silver in your case, help protect us from this sort of system and help protect our wealth during a potential collapse?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize what you just said. Everything I've said so far is my best studied view, but it's not inevitable at all. And there could be a lot of resistance, and it may not be implemented. Or once it's implemented, it may not work. It may fail. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about what we think is going to happen, but this doesn't necessarily mean it will be, that will be the case. So I would say, why silver? I wrote the 10 Rules of Silver Investing almost 20 years ago. And one of the things I wrote about was, why it was important to start with silver. It goes something like this. No one wants to be a prophet of doom, but in the unlikely event of an all-out financial collapse, silver will be the money of last resort. Gold will be too high a unit value to buy everyday goods like gas and groceries, whereas silver will be adapted for that method. Therefore, I urge every investor to have some silver on hand, which they can use if necessary. That's kind of an outline of what they said. And I still believe that. And, if every investor owned silver, the price of silver would probably be, north of a couple $100 an ounce. The problem is that most people aren't aware of that. They don't believe it, or they're in silver. It hasn't gone anywhere for 10 years. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people are discouraged by silver. But the main fact is there's not enough participation. That's one. And the other one is how much it makes up the financial system. Gold makes up maybe 1% of the financial system, but silver makes up 0.02% of the financial system. But having that small market presence, if it doubled the market participation, you could see a huge increase in price because it is a small market.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because it's like so many people around the globe, really. I mean, the majority of the population don't really know about this side of investing and even owning precious metals. They don't know how to even go about owning precious metals. Another question, and a lot of people do say in the alternative space as well, is if everything does fail or if you're shut out of the system, how will owning precious metals in that case really, really help you? And I always sort of say it's not really for that use, in my opinion. My opinion is it's something to hedge a potential or an inflation event. Then you can use the gains that you've made to potentially buy, land or whatever you want in terms of barter material. I mean, what's your view on that? Because a lot of people do say, why invest in, let's say crypto and precious metals, for example, when, potentially you're going to be shut out of the system and, there's a potential for you not being able to use these things in that case.
Okay. Well, going back to the 10 rules of silver investing, and I went from memory what I wrote, which my memory's pretty good, but it's 10 rules, and then I expand on what the rule means. So rule number one is when all else fails, there is silver. I mean, I can't be more succinct and direct than that. So when the cyber attack comes, or the grid goes down, or is turned off, or you're not allowed to enter into the internet because you have a low social credit score or any of that stuff, when all of that fails, there's silver. And again, going back to small units like a 90% silver dime or 90% silver quarter, like I used to get paid when I was an 11-year-old kid, that has the value of about $6.25. So when I was a teenager, I could buy a gallon of gas for a quarter. And now I could take that silver quarter and still buy a gallon of gas. So it's done what it's supposed to do, which means maintain your wealth. It certainly hasn't made any of us wealthy, but I think those days are ahead of us. So really, when all else fails, there's silver now going a step further, and it's not a total breakdown, which I doubt there's going to be a total breakdown, but there's going to be some big disruptions. There's a big difference between not being able to get exact groceries you want and being able to eat than there is not having any. I mean, that I don't think is going to take place. There could be areas where it's that bad, but people are they adapt fairly quickly, especially under harsh conditions. They'll move, they'll find a way. So back to what you said, George, is as this thing morphs into the next system, there'll be a lot of opportunities. Mm-hmm. And because you have got real money, you will be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So you may be able to buy somebody's business. You may be able to take over a grocery store. You may be able to buy cash flow real estate. You might be able to buy land. You might be able to start a car lot. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do when you have cash at the bottom. And I mean real cash, physical gold and silver. Could be other things, but those, as I said earlier, are the primary ones. So I think that's it. I mean, the rule number one, when all else fails, there's silver, of course, gold as well. And gold would be very useful in a scenario that's the most likely, which means huge distortions, people that are over leveraged. I mean, there's probably people out there in the real estate market right now that are looking at a $5 million, $10 million, $15 million net worth. They look at all their properties, they look at the cash flows, they look at everything they've got, but they're still over leveraged. And if the real estate market crashes and they can't service the debt because people don't pay the rent, or the government says they're only allowed to collect this much or they move out, all of a sudden those very large numbers on paper that make you feel very secure literally almost overnight, they could become very insecure. So there's a lot to a debt-based monetary system that most people don't find out until they find it out the hard way. And that is an example. Is that going to happen in real estate? I don't know. I do know it happened to some people in the 2008 crisis. And I'm not real pro-real estate right now. Of course, it's always a case-by-case individual one-on-one relationship. In other words, there's always opportunities in every market if you know the circumstances, but you have to look at them carefully.
Yes, for sure. And I think there's going to be opportunities, like you mentioned, in any of these sort of scenarios. There's always opportunities, and people who are awake to these situations usually can do pretty well and can really make the difference to their lives. And this is where the chances can happen for you. I guess moving on to what your view on crypto is, because a lot of precious metals guys can sometimes not really get into crypto. They sort of shy away from it because it's sort of tech-based. What's your view on the market? I know there are sort of definitely, let's say, government and banking-backed coins that maybe we don't want to get involved with, but there's also some good projects going on, in my opinion. So, I mean, what are your views on actually the whole crypto market and what you're getting involved with?
Well, my overall view is I am free market. And I wrote an article, My 2 Bits About Bitcoin, in I think 2017. It might have been as early as 2014. I don't remember. It's been at least 8 years or so. And, or maybe not 8 years, 5 years. Anyway, in my 2 bits about Bitcoin, I said, who cares what I think? If I am who I say I am, I'm free market. It's up for you to determine, and the market to determine if Bitcoin is good or bad. At that time when I wrote it, Bitcoin was about the only thing out there. And I also said that watch out, because the money masters have a monopoly and they will not want to lose this monopoly. So if Bitcoin truly is independent, and I'm not convinced that it is, but if it is, the bankers will figure out a way to get regulated or control it or usurp it or whatever. And I think that's happened. Go to my website, themorganreport.com, and you pull down the blog tab. There's 21 different interviews that I've done on what's called the Crypto Conspiracy Podcast. And I've brought in a lot of different guests talking about what's really going on in the crypto space. So if you're interested in looking at both sides of the coin, before you invest or even after you invest. I would highly recommend that you probably watch every one of them, but really to save time, I would suggest you listen to number one. Number one to kind of get an intro to it. Number 4, where we bring up the Graph Commons and show how much Jeffrey Epstein and MIT is tied to Bitcoin. And then go to number 14, where I interviewed Kurt Wuckert, who is a historian for Bitcoin. And he verified everything that I had conjectured up to that point, meaning that it has been usurped by the banks, and proof of that. And then 2 I've done with Michael McKibben. The last one was the most recent. It was episode number 21. And he talks about how the whole email/social media space started and that what he had to do with it and how it was basically patented and the patent was taken from him. And so there's a lot to this story that I've done probably more work on, I think, than anybody in the public domain on this whole situation. So if you really want to look hard and deep and keep an open mind, I would highly recommend that you get on the website, themorningreport.com, hit the blog tab and start looking for the Crypto Conspiracy podcast.
Excellent. Yeah. I think for me, maybe it started potentially with the look on being freedom-based, but it's hard to tell. Like you said, it is hard to tell. And Bitcoin is completely trackable. Whatever transactions you do on the Bitcoin blockchain, they will be able to use chain analytics to basically just trace that transaction, and they can see exactly how much you've got in your wallet. And that's not just government, that's also other hackers as well. It's like, even criminals out there who want to, hack your accounts, let's say, can basically see everything you have. Now, that's where I think there is a solution in the privacy coin space. I mean, do you know much about the sort of privacy coins at all, or do you have a view on those?
Yeah, well, I'm all for, free market and, peaceful solutions by, innovators. And yes, I am familiar with some of them. And this whole thing about the blockchain is very, very interesting to me, because really it's a double-edged sword, overused metaphor. But on one side, you have central bank digital currencies controlled by the elites that we already given us so much grief, but you also have the opportunity to create your own system. And if money is power, which is one of my main premises, and the bankers have the money, then they have the power. But if we have the money, then we have the power. And we don't even need them anymore, or very likely, if we agree to have some leadership, quote unquote. So the opportunity is there. It's just how will it be taken? And, the power of authority is breaking down all the time. I mean, unless you're in the programmed space, meaning, you watched enough TV that your neural connections are so entrained that you can't think outside of what you've been programmed to think. But anyone that's not in that ilk, which is probably better than half the population, then you have the ability to make your own rules, and do your own thing. And of course, that's where the privacy coins come in. So it's not determined yet. I know I sound like Mr. Doom, Mr. Gloom. I don't mean to. I think I'm a realist. I try not to overemphasize the bad or the good. There's both always. And the opportunity is there. So a lot of people, George, in your generation or my kids' generation, very bright, very optimistic, looking for solutions, thinking about how things can be done differently, thinking way outside the box, and certainly have not been programmed by the mainstream media into the inability to come up with solutions. So pretty optimistic about it, but not 100%, obviously. There's going to be a struggle, and it's going to be, the overused word, very interesting times to see how this really, really comes about. I mean, you could see, for a quick example, the CBDC implemented, you have to have a central bank digital currency. Your bank account's going to be closed. You've got 1 week to change over. Who knows? And, nobody does it. Of course, people will. But the point being that they may not succeed. Again, it's a big thing in a way because there's so many people that are becoming awake and aware all the time and are seeking solutions. I mean, something as simple as creating your own currency, like happened in the 30s, where your local community just agrees and makes it a legal contract and say for every hour you work, you get this chit. And so many of these chits are good for a chicken and, that kind of thing. And that happened a lot in the 30s. So it could happen again. As I said earlier, when the pressure's on, people get very, very creative and, power to the people.
Yeah, you're forced to become creative, right? Otherwise, I think it just brings this whole COVID thing into perspective where it's forced people to make the change that actually probably has bettered their lives. Because there's a lot of people in our space who have probably had, I'm not going to say great time in the last 2 years, but I will say maybe an enlightening time, and also probably have moved into their passion or at least have woken up to what's going on in the current system. So yeah, there is a lot of change, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, chaos fully on and complete destruction for you. There's always going to be, in my opinion, solutions. And us as human beings, we are, in my opinion, again, very creative, like you said, and also very, very, we have a drive for freedom within us. And I think that could take hold. We've seen a lot of awakening in the last 2 years, for sure, a record number. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes, like you said. So, I mean, let's move on to any projects that you're currently working on. I guess Load is one in the space, but also personally, what are you doing to prepare for, potentially what's going on in the food crisis, just COVID in general, but even just how the system's going? What are you doing personally in your own life? Obviously, you don't have to share too many details, but just what you're doing to prepare, and also speak a bit about Load as a project that you're working on.
Sure. Well, as Buffett says, we eat our own cooking. I obviously have some, it's called junk silver or constitutional silver. I have what's called bag silver, which would be bag silver is $1,000 face value. So it'd be 4,000 quarters would equal 1,000 face value. I've got a bag of $100 in dimes, and that's $100, right? That's all it is. But in fiat, it's 2,500, right? So that again shows you what I said a moment ago about a quarter will buy a gallon of gas still if it's a silver quarter. So I have that. I also have paper money. I mean, if the ATMs go out or there's a problem with a cyber attack or any of that stuff, it's not bad to have physical, cash. So I have that. I saw the food thing from a long time ago. I've been advocating, have some extra food. So I've got that. And then being more self-sufficient, thinking back about taking it, using, let's say, the precious metals and converting it into something that is beneficial more than just, having solid money, because really, having a strong savings is a good thing, but really at the end of the day, you're going to have to do something with it, hopefully something productive. So you go back to the idea of raw land. Let's say that you have enough silver, you can buy, I don't know, let's make up a number, 5 acres. 5 acres, you don't give it to the community, but you let the community come and work on it for vegetables, and you make a community garden. And everybody benefits, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things that, that have a potential like that. You just got to do a little bit of thinking to implement them. So that's about it. I, try to live within my means, always have, try to be somewhat frugal, but not miserly. Always think of how I can contribute. I won't go into what I do, but I will just say that it's not all about me. It's certainly about what I can contribute, not only to these podcasts, but what I can do on a sometimes financial, often on a financial basis, because it's easier for me to contribute that way than to, work at the food bank or work at the homeless shelter or whatever, although those things are not out of my wheelhouse. So I'll give it back to you, George.
Excellent. Yeah. I've been doing the same thing with the sort of money in the account, taking cash, physical cash as well, even though, technically it may not be worth much, let's say in a hyperinflation environment, but people's minds have been focused on the fact that paper money is worth something, right? So, it could be useful in those sort of scenarios. And in regards to, like you said, doing charitable things, helping others who really need it in this time is definitely something that you're advocating good for the world, and usually it comes to you and you don't do it out of the fact that you want something back. You're giving, and these sort of things are certainly in alignment with how I guess people could and should be in a way. Just being more giving. We've come into a world where we're very greedy and focused on ourselves, and I think this has probably led to the situation that the collective has gone into. So that's a great point as well. I guess finally, what advice and key takeaways would you give our listeners to implement sort of strategies in their lives that they may not have heard of before? Just key sort of takeaways for them to take into their life.
Well, I think being independent or self-sufficient, independent doesn't mean you do everything by yourself, but independent means you do more by yourself. In other words, instead of hiring someone to fix your plumbing, you learn to do it yourself, or maybe minor repairs on your car or whatever. In other words, the more self-sufficient you are, or really the more self-sufficient your community is, the less dependent you are. And we in the West particularly become over-dependent. I mean, you've got to have someone that tells you, what your meal plan is. You got to have someone tell you how to lift the weight. You got to have someone tell you, where to put your money. You have to, so all these things you should be, able to do on your own. So the more self-sufficient you become, and the more that you simplify your life, I think will be the keys going forward. And I guess the last one is attitude and appreciation. If your attitude is, I can get through this no matter what the world throws at me, that attitude alone will carry a great deal. And then appreciation for what you do have. You might go back, geez, I'll never get that brand of, chocolate again or whatever. And that will happen. I'm not sort of saying chocolate, but there will be things that you take for granted today or a couple of years ago that just will not be available anymore. And so, but that doesn't mean, that's just a thing. Maybe a food item, it may be a game, it may be an internet site, who knows? But the idea is to appreciate what you do have, be grateful for what you do have. And lastly, your contribution. What can you contribute to your fellows? What is it in time? What is it in money? What is it in conversation? Sometimes just listening is one of the most underrated things that a friend can do. Sometimes people just want to get it off their chest. They don't even want your feedback. They just want to vent, and you just sit there and listen to every word and say, thank you for sharing, and walk away. That has a lot more power than most people understand. So hopefully there's some ideas for you.
Nice one. Yeah. Holistic approach is something that is definitely key for our independence or community, because we've been focused to sort of be pigeonholed into, I am a economist, or I am a plumber, and that's all I know, right? Instead of actually having a holistic approach of, I can do certain things and I know certain things in each of these categories, so you can be self-sufficient, or at least your community, like you said, can be self-sufficient. I mean, in the UK, we would, if something breaks in your bathroom or something, you're straight on the phone to some sort of guy to come and fix it. If something happens to your car, straight away you're phoning someone else to fix it. Instead of these sort of approaches, unfortunately, that just gives your power away. And you don't need to necessarily know how to do everything. Your community as a community could have those skills, but, having those minor skills can get you a long way. And I think that's the way to sort of take our power back potentially. Well, thanks, David, for joining me today. And I look forward to having you on again in the future, potentially. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Plus, if you're interested in having one-to-one consulting to prepare your wealth for the Great Reset, check out this episode's show notes for a link to cryptonomousconsulting.com. Also, we'll have all the links to the Morgan Report and also other links to David Morgan's stuff, all in the show notes for you to learn more. Please do check it out. Definitely, it's going to be amazing information for you to learn and to, get that sort of education that you need to move forward. So, yeah, thank you very much, David. Any last thoughts?
No, that's it, George. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you, David, and peace and love to you all.
Back to you.